Morning, committee. Good morning. It's funny because people were saying, oh, you had a day off. I said, no, we had 2 off days. So we did not have a day off. But I will open with requests for bill introductions. Senator Clays. And would you like to introduce yourself also?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'm Senator Clays, spent 8 years in the House. Good to be here in the Senate, serving on the Tax Committee. I have a bill regarding the Eisenhower Foundation. It is RS-0520 that I submit for introduction.
Committee, are there any questions on the bill? We've seen this bill before. It's to help with the Eisenhower Museum.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any objections to the bill request? Seeing none, we'll make the request. Thank you. Are there any other bill introductions or requests for bill introductions? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and get started. Committee, there has been a slight change to the agenda. I would ask for your patience again. We are still getting situated with the committee assistant. Michael is going to be with us and he'll be coming up to speed. So he's learning the ropes, and Sky has been extremely helpful in training him, and she is new to this committee also. So I do ask for your patience. We have 3 hearings scheduled today. I am going to move the hearing on Senate Bill 23 to February 2nd. So we will continue the hearing today on Senate Bill 22 and then pick up the hearing on, we'll have the hearing on Senate Bill 21. I think we'll start with 21 because we may need to continue 22. Actually, for the minutes, let's just go with 22 again. Committee, Adam, would you like to give us an overview on Senate Bill 22?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just go through a quick recap of Senate Bill 22. Of course, Senate Bill 22 provides for several income tax changes. Section 1 of the bill deals with fraudulently obtained unemployment compensation as a result of an individual's ID theft. It would not be included for income tax purposes. Sections 2 and 4 would provide modifications for determining Kansas taxable income. These would include the global intangible low tax income, GILTI income, business interest, capital contributions, FDIC premiums, business meal expenditures, payment protection program loans, and corresponding expenses. Section 3 would allow individuals who take the federal standard deduction to be able to elect to take or to elect to itemize their deductions for state income tax purposes. Section 5 of the bill would allow corporations from 2018 through 2020 to use the federal net operating loss calculation when determining their carry forward or carry back of these corporations' net operating losses, and Section 6 would amend how the expensing deduction is calculated by including Section 179 property deductions rather than excluding them, and also expanding the expensing deduction so it'll be available to all taxpayers subject to income tax, in addition to the currently is available for corporate and privileged taxpayers. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Adam. Committee, any questions? Thank you, Adam. We'll continue with the hearing now. We have some left from the other day. Dan Murray. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dan Murray with the State Director for the Kansas National Federation of Independent Business. As you all may recall from previous testimony, we represent small businesses of all sizes from all across the state, all kinds of types of small business owners. We have about 4,000 members in Kansas. We stand today in support of Senate Bill 22, particularly if I can get that out of my mouth, as it relates to Section 3, relating to the itemized deductions. If small business owners, most of which in my testimony you'll see 75% file at the individual level, which means they're taxed on their personal income. In Kansas, we have about 256,000 small businesses representing a little over 99% of the economy of employers in Kansas. And they employ over 600,000 workers, and that's over 50% of the workforce in Kansas. If 75% of many of those businesses file at the individual level and cannot avail themselves of these itemized deductions, if they take that higher standard deduction at the federal level, we have seen roughly, and we've got the new fiscal note, it looks like today, a $60 million windfall to the state of Kansas. Not because you did anything, but because of federal action. And so we need to provide that flexibility for those small business owners that do take the higher federal deduction, allow them to itemize their deductions at the state level and not have this unforeseen and unfair tax increase. I do want to reference the representative from the Kansas Action for Children last week pointed to a study that was done that said, I think 4 in 10 of the top 20%, so roughly 40% of the top 20% based on this study would benefit from this change. So essentially saying the wealthy will benefit from this. I think what needs to be clear and understood, and I think most of you do, or if not all of you, is that many of those quote unquote wealthy are small business owners that file at the individual level. It's not the top 1% of folks that are walking away with money in their pockets. It's struggling small businesses that need this flexibility. So I won't go on. I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time and appreciate the opportunity to speak today on behalf of NFIB.
Thank you, Dan. Committee, any questions? Senator Corson. No, Senator Corson, please.
I had one question. Do you have is there a statistic anywhere that would show the net tax burden with respect to folks who are now taking the standard deduction at the federal level, and has there, when you add up the federal and state tax burden for those folks, has it gone up or down? Because there could be scenarios, correct me if I'm wrong, where somebody would be receiving significant tax relief at the federal level because of the increase in the standard deduction, but then could be paying more at the state level, but on net, they're still paying less in terms of their overall tax burden. Do you understand the question? Do you understand those statistics, or are those available anywhere?
Thank you, Senator, Madam Chair. I think those are hard to gather. There's not one standard resource to go and find those statistics. We did do some outreach to members to see what their personal experience was. By and large, those that responded were those that either had a wash in terms of the tax benefit that the federal tax cuts provided with the increase in their experience at the state level, or they actually were paying net a little bit more. Now, we didn't hear from those that maybe benefited on a net level. But the purpose of the tax cuts, and this is something that NFIB stands by, is that the lower the income taxes are, the better it is for small business owners to profit, reinvest in their business, and provide better salaries and benefits to their employees. So there was no intention to create at the state level what it has equated to a $60 million tax increase on individuals and small business owners that file at the individual level. So we just think it ought to be corrected, or at least allowed to have that option for small business owners. But I can look to see if there's any updated information, statistics. I don't think the Department of Revenue could gather that information, but they might have some national resources that could point to that. So I'll try to follow up and let you know.
Eddie, is that something that legislative research could help with? we'll make the request there too, see if we can get that information, because I have heard from constituents that are paying more in their state income tax now than their federal. And as I said, one of them, I'm sure there's more out there, medical expenses, they're not able to deduct those now because they can't itemize on their state return.
You know, speaking from my own personal experience, it was effectively a wash. My state income taxes increased because I took that higher federal deduction. So the benefit that I realized at the federal level basically was a wash with the increase that I saw at the state level. And I think that was an experience for several small business owners across the state, many.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much.
Mark Toom. Welcome, Mark. And for those of you that don't know, Mark's twin brother helps us out with our fiscal notes.
That's correct, so don't blame me. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for allowing me to testify today on behalf of the Kansas Association of Realtors in support of Senate Bill 22. I'm going to echo a few of the comments of the previous conferee, Mr. Murray, and really limit my remarks to the itemized deductions portion included in Section 3. This part of the legislation would provide Kansas income tax filers with the long overdue ability to take state-level itemized deductions regardless of whether they take the standard deduction or itemize on their federal returns. And I also wanted to comment on a previous conferee that included that this would be an ill-advised policy direction because it was essentially able to increase other areas of the state budget. And I think what that fails to realize is that this is a state tax increase that was not voted on by the legislature. It happened because of federal changes, and really, if you're going to increase somebody's taxes, it should be a transparent debate and a vote rather than just letting it happen. I'd also suggest that this is not just limited to wealthy taxpayers. If you look at the year before the federal changes, nearly 250,000 Kansans took that mortgage interest deductions, and others took property tax deductions. About half of those taxpayers had an adjusted gross income of under $100,000. So if you're looking at middle class ratings, and the Pew Research Center defines that as middle class households as those with an income of 2/3 to double the U.S. median household income. And in Kansas, for a family of four, that would be a range of about $58,000 to $174,000. And so there's certainly middle class tax relief that would be included in this. Our interest in this is that fundamentally this reduced the value of the mortgage interest and the property tax deductions as tax incentives for home ownership, really with no significant tax differential between owning and renting for more than 90% of taxpayers. And we believe that Kansas should be encouraging home ownership rather than making home ownership harder, and these deductions go a long way in doing that. So thank you very much for the opportunity to testify in support of this bill, and would be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mark. Committee, any questions? I have a question for you. I should have asked of Dan also. I may ask him if he wants to respond to this. But would you be receptive to removing the carry back net operating loss section of the bill and possibly changing the date so that it's not retroactive?
Our testimony is certainly limited to the itemized deduction portion, and we had previously advocated for a retroactive component. And it's just a lot simpler from a tax point of view to set a policy and then move forward. So we'd certainly be supportive of that kind of concept to make it as simple as possible.
Okay, thank you. Dan, would you like to comment?
Madam Chair, Dan Murray with NFIB. On the fly, I couldn't say necessarily that I have any firm position from our members on where they would be in that regard. But I would say if those provisions are providing a hurdle in terms of the fiscal impact, then certainly we want to fix this moving forward for sure. And probably in most taxpayers' standpoint, the water's under the bridge with regard to their previous filing. So it might make sense if I'm being politically feasible, to look at some of those provisions as well, but I can get some firmer answers to you.
That would be great. You know, I understand we've got issues before us, and we are going to see a decrease in revenue at some point, but we can't continue to transfer the burden to individuals as we continue to do. But I just wanted to, there are going to be some negotiations and work on the bill, and I wanted to get your input to that.
I appreciate that.
Yep, thank you. So, Mark, there's a question for you. Senator Corson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question about tax treatment under the CARES Act. So my understanding is, you know, with the respect to the decoupling, I just want to be clear, though, that the CARES Act, I'm looking at the November consensus revenue estimates, says the CARES Act includes several federal tax law provisions that will flow through by way of conformity and have an impact on Kansas individual and corporation income tax receipts. These tax provisions would reduce state general fund receipts by a total of $70 million in FY 2021 and $36 million in FY 2022. Just so I'm clear and so the committee is clear, you're not arguing that we should decouple from those provisions. You're just arguing that we should decouple from the 2017 federal tax law. You're not arguing that we should. So essentially, your position, as I understand it, is you want to decouple where it increases potentially the tax burden, but you don't want to decouple where it decreases the tax burden.
We have a long-standing policy for itemized deductions in response to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and that predates any of the CARES legislation, and so we have been supportive of that. And that the revenue that's been gained from that is a part of your pot of money. I mean, there are other choices to be made, but our focus is really focused on the itemized deduction piece dating, you know, from our policy from 2017.
Thank you. That's helpful. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mark. Elizabeth Patton, welcome to the committee.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Patton. I'm the State Director for Americans for Prosperity Kansas. I won't be redundant this morning. I know you have a lot on your agenda, so I'll just kind of briefly go over a few points I want to hit and express my agreement for the points made by Mr. Murray and Mr. Toombs. Again, as you guys know, we have an unintended tax increase on the books here. This bill or similar versions of this have passed multiple times in both chambers over the years. And one thing I wanted to point out is that when Governor Kelly vetoed this bill, she said that the benefit was negligible. And I just wanted to point out that from our perspective, any amount of money that can be returned to Kansas families, it should be returned. And we should not be minimizing a benefit or relief to Kansas families and businesses, especially because that money was never intended for the state general fund in the first place. So just from a policy perspective, I won't reiterate and repeat some of the statistics that they gave about how this does benefit Kansas families. Madam Chair made a great point about some of those related to medical billing, but just wanted to reemphasize the policy overall. This is a bill we have advocated for several years, and on behalf of thousands of our activists and many of those who have advocated for the passage of this legislation and how it would benefit them personally over the years, we ask that you as a committee make this a priority, and let's finally make this fix for Kansas taxpayers going forward. So thank you. I would be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Don't have a question, but I appreciate that you brought up that point because it was a concern that many of us had. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Any other questions, committee? Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
I'll draw your attention, committee, to Alex Oral's testimony. It's written only. It's in your packet. And then we'll Michael Mazarov.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm here.
Thank you, Michael. For some reason, we can't, there we see you. Okay.
You ready for me to start?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Michael Mazarov. I'm a senior fellow with the State Fiscal Division of the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in DC. The center is a nonpartisan research and policy institute that pursues federal and state policies designed to reduce poverty and inequality and to restore fiscal responsibility in equitable and effective ways. And I appreciate the opportunity to testify today remotely in opposition to several of the provisions of Senate Bill 22, which addresses Kansas's conformity to several provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the CARES Act, and the recently enacted COVID relief bill. And I'm going to focus on Kansas's conformity to the GILTI provision, the business loss provisions of the CARES Act, and the Paycheck Protection Program provisions of the December relief bill. And my overriding point is that given the current fiscal situation that Kansas finds itself in, it would be quite risky and I don't believe fiscally responsible to move forward with this legislation. In fact, this bill goes in the opposite direction of what the state should be doing. I believe it should remain fully coupled to the GILTI minimum tax as it has been for the last 3 years. It should decouple from the relaxed limits on claiming losses that were in the CARES Act, and it should decouple from the recently altered federal tax break for the PPP loans. And I'll start with the Paycheck Protection Program because that's the most recent development and probably the biggest ticket item in terms of potential revenue loss. Just to remind you that this program effectively reimburses wage and certain other expenses incurred by businesses receiving these loans if the businesses meet certain conditions in terms of how they spend the money. And this subsidy in and of itself is valuable to businesses. These workers are presumably generating more income for the business than their wages are costing. And even if that's not true in the short term, it's still valuable for the business to be able to keep them employed and maintaining their skills rather than possibly losing them to another employer and having to hire someone else and train a new employee. But the December bill layered a tax break on top of that direct reimbursement of the wages. Previously, if the wages were paid out of forgiven PPP loans, the forgiven portion of the loan wasn't treated as gross income, but neither could the wages paid out of the forgiven portion be deducted. And that was tax neutral. That was the same as if the program didn't exist and therefore the worker wasn't employed. However, the federal tax treatment was changed in December retroactively to the beginning of 2020, so that now those wages can be deducted even though they're effectively being reimbursed by the federal government. And you and I can't deduct a charitable contribution if it's reimbursed by somebody else. We can't deduct a health expense if our insurance company pays for it. But the PPP participants can now deduct wages expenses reimbursed by the federal government. Now, Congress, of course, can choose to provide a tax break on top of this direct subsidy of these wages, but it would be extremely costly for Kansas to provide an additional tax break of its own. So far, approximately $5 billion of PPP loans have been provided to Kansas businesses, and more on the way as a result of the federal bill. And if those expenses can now be deducted with a top tax rate of about, between 5 and 6% for the personal income tax and 4% for the corporate tax, Kansas could be facing hundreds of millions of dollars of unanticipated personal and corporate income tax revenue losses. Now, I'm not sure the language was needed. I think Kansas is probably automatically conformed to this new federal treatment anyway, but the Senate Bill 22 makes explicit that Kansas conforms to this new federal tax treatment. And I think it should go in the opposite direction and decouple from the federal tax breaks, retaining tax neutral treatment, given its balanced budget requirement. It simply can't afford otherwise. And at the very least, I hope the bill will not be moved forward until the committee has received an estimate from the Revenue Department about how much revenue would be lost from conforming to this provision, because I think it could be quite significant. Second, SB 22 now proposes to provide unjustified tax breaks for losses that corporations incurred even before the pandemic hit. The TCJA had eliminated all loss carrybacks, and it limited loss carryforwards so that they can only offset 80% of taxable income rather than 100%. But the CARES Act retroactively reinstated lost carrybacks for 2018 and 2019 and extended the carryback period to 5 years from the previous 2. In other words, a business that lost money in 2019, which was a year of relatively healthy economic growth before the pandemic even hit, can now file amended returns for years as far back as 2014 and receive refunds of taxes it had previously paid. And in some cases, these losses will really only be paper losses, not real economic losses, and they're resulting from overly generous write-offs for depreciation of equipment. Again, this scattershot approach to providing liquidity to corporations is something the federal government can do because it doesn't have a balanced budget requirement. But the large majority of states don't allow lost carrybacks because they do have to balance their budgets. So for Kansas now to reinstate carrybacks retroactively for 3 years and to allow carryforwards to zero out taxable income by conforming to the CARES Act is not fiscally responsible given its budget situation. And this doesn't even address Kansas's urgent need to decouple from another costly loss-related tax break in the CARES Act that allows very high-income business owners to use losses from their businesses to offset their salary and investment income, which I'm not addressing here, but which I've addressed in another paper that I cite in my written testimony. And finally, SB 22 proposes to substantially decouple from TCJA's minimum tax on so-called guilty income. And I think Kansas should retain its current level of conformity to this provision, which has now been in place for 3 years with no evidence offered to suggest it's harmed the state's economic competitiveness in any way. Kansas has long required water's edge combined reporting for its corporate income tax because it's understood that without it, corporations can easily shift income to subsidiaries in low or no tax states. But Kansas remains vulnerable to the same kinds of income shifting strategies when corporations use them to shift profits internationally. And international income shifting remains an enormous problem. A very business-friendly Congress realized the seriousness of the international profit shifting problem by including guilty in TCJA. And in doing so, it provided Kansas and all states with an opportunity to recoup a small portion of the revenue loss by conforming to the guilty provision. I think it would be imprudent for Kansas to now forego the opportunity by decoupling. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? I have a few for you. First off, what sparked your interest in Kansas? We have the only 2 conferees that are against the bill are both out of state.
Well, I've been working all over the country since TCJA to encourage states to conform to the guilty provision. We work in states all over the country, just as ALEC does, just as the Tax Foundation does. So, we're interested in good state tax policy everywhere.
So that brings up a few questions from your testimony. In Kansas, if a business is not allowed to itemize, they're not allowed to deduct their mortgage interest and other expenses. And so you don't support that portion of the bill?
Well, Madam Chair, knowing that I had a limited amount of time and not wanting to take up too much of your time, I really wanted to focus on the areas in which I have expertise, which is the business tax provisions. So I'm not really. I'm concerned about revenue loss, and I'm concerned about unintended revenue loss. So certainly, decoupling from the allowing people to itemize in Kansas who have chosen the standard deduction at the federal level will reduce revenues that the state is now currently collecting. So I'm certainly concerned about that, but my focus really is not on that today.
So my question then, can businesses deduct their payroll expenses if it's not a PP loan money?
Of course they can, certainly. I mean, a business's ability to deduct its business expenses is completely independent of whether a business owner can deduct their mortgage interest or their, personal property taxes on their home. I mean, even if they're not, even if the state were to retain its current standard deduction policy, that doesn't affect the business's ability to deduct their payroll costs.
Okay, thank you. And one last question. Wouldn't it be prudent for us to not increase our spending during these times?
I mean, you obviously have to balance your budget. There is serious need out there. Obviously you have enormous expenses resulting from the pandemic, and those expenses have to be met consistent with your revenue. I understand you have to balance your budget, and you have critical decisions to make. And really, I'm here just to say that here are 3 areas where you can avoid an really unnecessary and unjustified, from a policy standpoint, revenue loss. And to the extent you avoid those revenue losses, your ability to balance your budget and meet the needs that you need to meet in the state will be enhanced.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Mazeroff.
Thank you.
We need to continue, so thank you. Next up is Darlene Shanks from the University of California, Davis, and we just have a couple of minutes. Darlene.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Darren.
Oh, it's Darren?
Specialized in state and local tax law. I've written a great deal about guilt. Darian, can you hear me okay?
Hi, Darian.
Hi.
We can now.
Sorry. You can now. Okay. I'm sorry for that. So let me go quickly. You said you only have a couple of minutes. I specialize in GILTI. I'm happy to talk about the other provisions that Mr. Mazeroff talked about, or about the itemized deduction decoupling, which, as far as the components of this bill are concerned, I would say is the least problematic. The other ones are much more problematic. I'd also point out that Kansas has a rolling conformity system, meaning you are dragged along by federal tax law, whatever the feds might do. And my advice would be, among other things, to stop with rolling conformity and choose a fixed conformity date so that you can choose deliberately which provisions you'd like to conform to and which provisions you would not like to conform to. I also agree with the notion that there should be tax relief. The question is who should get the tax relief. And so using GILTI or reduced conformity GILTI as a tool for tax relief is, I consider sort of extremely poor tax policy and a poor use of state resources. This is because GILTI income is pretty much by definition the income of large, profitable multinational corporations that are involved in profit shifting. Only such corporations, and particularly those that derive a great deal of income from intellectual property, are likely to generate significant GILTI income. And so it's harder to imagine a poor fit for relief during the current pandemic and recession. GILTI stands for Global Intangible Low Taxed Income. It's a technical provision of the federal corporate tax law that was added by the TCJA. It was nearly uniformly recognized that the shifting of corporate profits was a large problem. A middle-of-the-road estimate is that it's about a problem of about $300 billion a year at the federal level. To the extent that Kansas conforms to federal corporate tax law, money shifted out of the federal corporate tax base is shifted out of Kansas's corporate tax base. At the heart of GILTI is a calculation for ferreting out shifted profit.
Mr. Shanks, I'm going to have to, we have your testimony.
Okay,
and
terrific.
We have, yes, so we can read through it. Do you have anything to add from the previous conferee or to opposition of this bill?
That is the heart of my testimony. I'm happy to answer any question.
Wonderful, thank you. I want the committee to be able to have time to ask you questions. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I have one. What put this on your radar to testify for the tax committee today?
Great. Well, as I've said, I argued for conformity to guilty and taxing the repatriations since 2018. It's been kind of like banging my head against the wall. And to the extent that
This
I
is the
haven't,
first time we've heard you in Kansas.
true, this is the first, but you have decided to decouple this bill seems to have gotten pretty far. And so it was brought to my attention and I wanted to weigh in.
Actually, it got further in 2018 and 2019.
Well, I'm sorry I didn't make it there, but I'm glad that it didn't get any farther
No,
because
that's fine. Committee, any other questions? We appreciate your testimony and your interest in Kansas. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Committee, are there any other questions on Senate Bill 22? Is there anybody in the room that would like to testify on that bill? If not, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 22. We need to open the hearing on Senate Bill 21. Amelia, are you online?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Would
All
you
right,
give
very
us an
good.
overview, please? Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Yes, Senate Bill 21 relates to countywide retailer sales tax authority, and essentially the provisions would validate the result of an election that was held on November 3rd of 2020 in Cherokee County. They submitted the question to increase their retailer sales tax by 0.5%. And the revenue received would be expended solely for purposes of financing ambulance services within the county, renovations and maintenance of county buildings and facilities, and any other projects that the county deems necessary. The tax would terminate prior to January 1 of 2033. You can find that this is a pretty long bill, but if you look at page 4, that's where the amendment to KSA 12-187 begins. Also, just for your information, this concept of validating an election after it has occurred has occasionally occurred in the past, and the legislature has provided authority after the fact. If you look in paragraph 3, starting on page 2 and runs into page 3, there are other examples of the legislature validating election results. And most recently, there was an amendment, I believe, made in the 2019 session for Finney County. If you go back one subparagraph to H, you can see that. And this bill would take effect from and after publication in the Kansas Register, and I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, are there any questions? Seeing none, is Kyle Rainey, are you online, Kyle? I think Kyle intended to be in person, so, and I don't see him in the room. Caden? Is Caden online? Jay Hall? Jay, are you online? And Lori Johnson is written only, committee. I would turn your attention to Lori's testimony, and I think, is the other testimony in your packet? Should be. Well, this will be unusual that we didn't have anybody actually testify, but we are in trying times. So I would bring your attention to Lori's testimony, committee. What happened is as Amelia said, the county had an election November 3rd. They were misinformed. They got some bad information and thought that they could use the wording that they did to continue an existing sales tax in the county. And so they are coming before us. This bill is in order to correct that so they can collect that tax that passed almost, I think it was a 2-to-1 margin. It passed almost overwhelmingly within the county. We do this quite frequently, more often than we should, but it's not unprecedented for this committee. I'm not testifying for or against the bill. I'm just giving you the history on how it came before us. So Are there any questions on the bill or the?
Madam Chair, this is
Yes,
Senator Holland. Can I ask a question?
absolutely,
Or
Senator.
maybe more a comment. And just, I've been on tax committees, both House and Senate, for several years. And I would just ask a question of the Senate Tax Committee body, our committee there. I guess what I'm wondering is that I'm wondering really what type of a service that we're doing as the legislature, as these counties basically come to us for approval to run these things. I'm wondering if there's a more streamlined process of maybe just removing some of the legislature's involvement as these county prepare these notices and put them before the voters to vote. Didn't know if there was will the committee to even examine some of that, if there's a way to streamline this process or not. I just want to throw that out there and see if there were any takers on looking at this a little bit further. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. You actually bring up an issue that has been close to my heart for some time. I would love to have a blue ribbon commission study on tax. We tend to pick winners and losers and how we fund our government in the state of Kansas. We absolutely need a deep dive. I do not think this is the bill to do that on, though, just because of the situation we're in. But at some point, Senator, I would love to kick off those discussions and make an attempt. We need to investigate how we're funding local governments and be able to give them the capacity to work within the means that they need, and this is part of that legislation. I did hear from the conferees from Cherokee. They are having trouble getting online. So are there any other further questions? Senator Baumgardner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So is it your intention that we will essentially table this until someone can come and testify on this?
No, I think we're fine with the written testimony, so in support of the bill. In fact, I'm hoping I will wait until Tuesday unless you guys would want to do it today. I didn't want to take action today, but I'm hoping we can put this on the consent calendar. Senator Baumgardner.
Madam Chair, well, I think it does bring up this issue, though I have not been on the tax committee for 2 years now, but I did previously serve on the tax committee. And this isn't the first time that something similar to this has come before us. And it continues to put the legislature in the position of providing the Band-Aid for what is a bureaucratic process that is incomplete or inaccurate. So I don't see, I understand how passing this out and getting it on the consent calendar is a quick fix, and that's what it is, a quick fix for a county that had an election that didn't follow appropriate guidelines. They thought they got the right information.
Yes, the lawyer that gave them the information is no longer working there.
And
I don't know if it's a result of this or not. That could be a coincidence. I have no idea.
exactly.
But
It continues to put us, the legislature, in a position of providing a quick fix, and it doesn't remedy the situation that comes up year after year.
as I agree, and as I said, Senator, this does need a deep dive, but I don't want to hold this county hostage in order to have that conversation. So it's whatever the wishes of the body. I wasn't planning on working it today. We would work it next week. If you would prefer to have somebody come in, I'm sure somebody from Cherokee County would come up, be willing to testify. Are they online at all now? I could have them call in if you guys would be comfortable with that.
I think that we can move forward. I don't know that we should necessarily take action today, but I think that there does need to be a remedy that doesn't so much require a deep dive. But we do know, and I would assume that research could provide us with just some background data as to how many times these types of things occur and why there isn't someone other than, well, this is the attorney that county hired, and they gave incorrect information. There has to be another solution to someone having the correct answer, other than after the fact coming to the legislature, asking forgiveness for action that elected officials on the local level took.
Well, thank you, Senator, again for your comments. I think what we need to do first is have a review for this committee, because I don't think all the senators understand how this works. And it is a deep dive in the sense that it's a balancing act. We have a 6.5% sales tax in the state of Kansas right now, and we allow counties to add 1% without coming to the legislature. Anything over and above that, they're required to come to the legislature, and that's current statute. There are several exclusions in the statute because they have come before us. And this county, they thought that they could continue their increase by having an initiative on the ballot. The language was incorrect on that initiative, and so therefore they had, in order to fix this, it has to come before the legislature. We had this situation, if you'll remember, a year or two ago, Garden City, Finney County. The same thing happened. It was actually a worse scenario. They were collecting it for over 6 months, and this legislative body gave them a pass. So yes, this is an issue. Is it a priority during these times of COVID and the availability for this committee? It is important, but I feel that the priorities are what we have been working on to get this one fixed as soon as possible. And you're welcome. We can have an informational hearing, or we can do you can introduce a bill. I'm more than willing to entertain. I know this is not ideal, but it is, we're playing the hand we're dealt. You'll hear me often say that, and we are dealt an odd hand this year. So, and anything that you did introduce this year would be alive for next year's debate too. And I'm hoping that we have much more time, and our committee assistants are up to speed. I know that it's just the process of the building, and we're trying to get them to be able to catch up with what we've done so far. Any other questions or comments?
Madam Chair, this is Senator Holligan. Can I just jump in 2 more seconds?
Senator,
Stand down.
please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to clarify so the body understands what I'm talking about. I was specifically referring to the situation where Chairwoman Tyson talked about a county proposing a sales tax increase of more than the penny or whatever. My thought is that I want to ask the question: is it should the legislature be in the position of reviewing those asks above the penny? That was my point. I want to address Senator Baumgartner's situation separately. I am more than happy to get with the counties and introduce legislation that basically, I believe it sounds like we have a recurring problem here with counties, either falsely interpreting or whatever. Not implying anybody they're trying to purposely do that, but the point is that I do think it would probably be appropriate for Department of Revenue attorneys or some administrative function to basically have some sort of review process, along the steps of the way as the counties bring forward these ballot proposals to their citizens, and hopefully that way, by having more state maybe revenue oversight, we don't have these problems as much in the future. But my only point is that, though, separately, I do want to ask the question: should the legislature be in the process of reviewing these county asks on the sales increases, regardless of the amount being asked? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. I will ask Eddie, if you can hear us online, would you please, at the request of the committee, put together a list of how many counties have come back before the legislature? They've passed, they've had a vote. I know of 3, I can name 3 off the top of my head since I've been in office. They've had the vote and then had to come to the legislature and date, a retroactive date in order to capture the election. I think that's your concerns, or is your concern just coming to the legislature at all? Thank you, Senator Baumgartner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is that they are having to, I understand that they come to the legislature for a fix. I understand that. But keep in mind, there is an association, Kansas Association of Counties. There are so many opportunities to help counties get it right. And I do remember that vote that we had to take on Garden City, and that was after they had collected taxes from the taxpayers. So we do need to help in the process, and there is a cost of bringing legislation to Topeka. There's a cost for that process, and we need to help counties figure out a way to get their work done legally.
Yes,
you,
especially
Madam
when
Chair.
they are paying somebody that's involved in the process. That's a great comment, excellent comment. I would also state that, well, thank you for your comments. We'll ask for that data, that information. And committee, it is interesting. I do want to do a deep dive on, and we are going to pick up income tax next. We've started with property tax. We're going to continue with it, and then income tax and sales tax. I am going to have a few informational committee hearings so that we can bring everybody up to speed on some of the items that we'll be looking at. Is there any other business or questions before the committee? If not, I will close the hearing on Senate Bill 21, and we will take action next week. That way Senator Holland and others can participate too. According to the Senate rules, not this committee rules, but the Senate rules, you're not able to vote if you're online. You are able to participate but not vote. Is there any other business to be brought before the committee? Committee, on the 26th, we will be hearing 2 bills. We're waiting on the bill numbers. They were introduced. One is on the short line rails, and it is on the calendar, and the other is the to require a tax ID if you're filing your somebody else's first income tax. So we've seen the bill several times in the legislature. And then I would like to work some bills, if time permits, on Tuesday, the 26th. Hopefully we'll pick up Senate Bill 22 and 21. And then committee, we have an informational hearing on wind turbine property tax. I felt like there's a lot of unknowns out there, and so PVD is going to come in and present, possibly 2 other people. And then the next week, we'll pick up February 2nd, and I'll get that schedule out. But we will move the hearing for Senate Bill 23 from today to February 2nd. Are there any other business or information to be brought before the committee? Seeing none, we're adjourned.